There's this kind of rejection that throws you off because it comes with no explanation. You walk into a room and catch a sideways glance. You get closer, and the conversation cools off. You say something simple, and someone hits back with sarcasm, like you've offended them without even knowing it. You try to be polite, try to stay low-key, try not to take up too much space, and still, something about you seems to irritate certain people. And then your mind does what it always does when it hits a puzzle. It looks for blame. You comb through details of your own behavior, replay phrases, analyze expressions, try to guess which invisible rule you broke. The mind wants a clear cause because a clear cause gives you a sense of control. If I figure out the reason, I can fix it. If I fix it, I belong. If I belong, I can relax. But there's a hard truth. Sometimes the rejection has nothing to do with what you did. It has to do with what you trigger. And that's a shift in perspective that few people can accept without bitterness, because it's easier to believe the problem is some specific mistake, something you tweak and done. It's more painful to realize that, in a lot of situations, you become a target not because of your flaws, but because you're like an involuntary mirror. You get close, and without meaning to, the person sees themselves. And what they see inside themselves might be unpleasant. This isn't about romanticizing yourself like every rejection is proof of your virtue. That's not it. It's also not about building a victim narrative. It's something more psychological and more human. Most people don't react to what's happening out there. They react to what's happening inside them. In that sense, you might just be the trigger. The real reason is hidden in the other person's inner territory. That's why when someone hates you for no reason, there's almost always a reason, just not the one you imagine. It's not about you being bad. It's about you touching something they don't want to face. An annoyance, an insecurity, a silent comparison, an old wound, a shadow they keep locked away. And suddenly, you show up as the key they didn't ask for. This is where Stoicism comes in with a clarity that eases things. The Stoics divided the world into two parts: what depends on you and what doesn't. And gratuitous hate, the irrational resentment, usually falls into the second category. You don't control other people's projections. You don't control their emotional maturity. You don't control the story someone makes up in their head about you. The most you can control is your character, how you act, how you respond, the quality of your choices. And when you make that distinction honestly, a lot of things fall into place. You stop begging for approval. You stop trying to be harmless all the time. You stop shrinking your presence to fit into spaces that reject anything that isn't submissive. You learn to separate real guilt from imagined guilt. You learn to take responsibility for what's yours and hand back to the other person what's theirs. In depth psychology, that handing back has a name: projection. When someone can't stand to recognize something in themselves, they can put it on you. What they fear in themselves becomes an accusation against you. What they haven't developed becomes reason for contempt toward someone who has. What they repressed becomes a flaw in someone who expresses it. And the most unsettling part is that to them, it feels true. They really believe they're reacting to you, when in reality, they're reacting to their own inner world. That's why certain people hate for no reason someone who's calm. Calmness becomes provocation to someone who's at war inside. Certain people hate for no reason someone who's disciplined. Discipline becomes a mirror for someone who lives on excuses. Certain people hate for no reason someone who speaks clearly. Clarity becomes a threat to someone who depends on confusion to stay in control. Certain people hate for no reason someone who doesn't join in gossip. Integrity becomes a silent accusation against someone who lives off small social betrayals. And that's exactly where the danger lies. When you interpret that as proof there's something wrong with you, unjust rejection can turn into a slow poison. You start pruning yourself, you start talking less, smiling less, explaining yourself too much, apologizing just for existing, taking up less space not out of humility but out of fear. And without realizing it, you trade authenticity for social survival. The price is high. Because when you live to avoid other people's dislike, you end up governed by invisible forces. You no longer choose based on virtue. You choose based on the expected reaction. You stop asking, is this right? And start asking, will this upset someone? And your life gets smaller and smaller, not because you're small, but because you started treating other people's opinions as law. Stoicism offers a way back to center. Live according to your best nature with courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom, and accept that not everyone will like it. Not everyone will like someone who doesn't need to manipulate, doesn't need to lie, doesn't need to please. Because pleasing too much for a lot of people is a sign of control. And when you're not controllable, you bother them. But again, this isn't about thinking you're superior. It's about understanding the mechanism. A lot of people were emotionally raised to function in social games. Who begs, who gives in, who humiliates, who shrinks themselves, who chases validation, who runs after. When you don't play those roles, you become an off-script element. And off-script elements tend to get attacked. Not because they deserve it, but because they unsettle. Think about how much the world values the appearance of harmony, even when it's fake. In a lot of places, what they call good vibes is really a silent pact of superficiality. No one says what they think. No one sets boundaries. No one calls out inconsistencies. Then someone shows up who, just by being whole, reveals how fragile it all was. That person's presence threatens the unspoken agreement. And when an agreement is threatened, the group reacts like it's defending itself. Now notice, this phenomenon can happen at work, in family and friend circles, in religious groups, on social media. And the more fragile the collective ego, the more aggressive the rejection of anyone different tends to be. That's why you can be a target without doing anything. You just existed with an attitude that doesn't match the insecurity of the environment. There's also a detail that's rarely said. Some people confuse neutrality with contempt. If you don't flatter, they think you're judging. If you don't join the gossip, they think you're stuck up. If you don't react intensely, they think you're cold. If you don't seek approval, they think you're arrogant. The human mind, when insecure, reads silence as attack, and that creates dislike with no real basis. So today's topic is exactly this: 8 reasons why some people hate you for no reason, and why it's probably not what you think. The idea isn't to put you in victim mode or teach you how to win socially. It's to give clarity so you stop carrying guilt that isn't yours and learn to respond with maturity. There's a quiet relief when you get this. Because you stop looking for flaws in every gesture. You start seeing that some reactions have nothing to do with you, but with the other person's inability to self-regulate. And with that comes a new responsibility. Keep being right without becoming submissive. Keep being kind without becoming vulnerable to manipulation. Keep being firm without becoming aggressive. When we don't understand these mechanisms, we try to fix hate with more giving, more explaining, more effort. But this kind of hate doesn't get fixed with effort. It reveals itself over time and dissolves when you don't feed it. There's a rejection that feels personal, but it's structural. You didn't do anything against someone and still they treat you like a threat. This happens because for a lot of people, what's different isn't just different. It's an uncomfortable reminder. And when someone is reminded of what they avoid in themselves, the reaction can come as dislike, sarcasm, coldness, or that kind of petty annoyance they never admit. The first reason is simple and uncomfortable. Some people hate you because you don't need them. Not in the sense of despising them, but in the sense of not depending. You don't live begging for approval. Don't live chasing confirmation. Don't live bending over to be accepted. And that sets off a silent alarm in people who feed off social influence. There are people who feel safe when they see the other person needy, pliable, anxious to belong. That kind of person sees neediness as an entry point. Whoever needs, gives in. Whoever gives in can be controlled. When you don't give that signal, they have nothing to hold on to. And here's a Stoic nuance. Whoever governs themselves reduces the power of those who try to govern others. This isn't war, it's fact. The Stoic is hard to manipulate because they know their own center. They don't confuse criticism with verdict. Don't confuse rejection with truth. Don't confuse applause with worth. To someone insecure, that looks like arrogance. To someone controlling, it looks like a challenge. So with no apparent reason, you become a target. The second reason is one of the most common. You trigger comparison. And comparison, for a fragile ego, hurts. It doesn't have to be beauty, money, or status. Sometimes it's more intimate. Your calm, your discipline, your clarity, your consistency, your way of speaking without getting lost, your refusal to humiliate yourself. The person doesn't hate you. They hate the feeling that comes up in them when they're near you. And since they don't know how to handle that feeling maturely, they turn it into projected dislike. Jung would say this is the shadow in motion. The other sees in you a quality they'd like to develop deep down, but didn't. And since it's hard to admit, I envy, the psyche takes a shortcut. I don't like this person. That way they preserve their self-image. They don't have to acknowledge their own lack. They can believe the problem is in your attitude. The third reason is silent and cruel. You don't participate in the group's pact of mediocrity. In many environments, there's an unspoken agreement. No one stands out too much. No one confronts anything. No one raises the bar. People maintain coexistence through complicity, not real respect. Then someone comes along who works seriously, who doesn't complain all the time, who doesn't need to put others down to feel good. Without you making a speech, the contrast shows up. And the contrast offends those who got used to justifying their own moral laziness with group behavior. You've seen this. When someone stops gossiping, they become stuck up. When someone minds their own business, they become cold. When someone is direct and polite, they become two-faced. The truth is that raising the standard threatens those who depend on a low standard to feel normal, and then hostility shows up as defense of the old balance. The fourth reason is more subtle. You have boundaries, and boundaries offend those used to invading. Some people call friendship unrestricted access to your time, attention, emotions. They call intimacy the chance to use you as a dump for frustration. They call freedom lack of consideration. When you say no, even without aggression, you interrupt a privilege, and every time a privilege is interrupted, they call it unfair. Stoicism teaches that boundaries are a form of justice. Justice isn't pleasing. Justice is giving everything its proper place. When you start giving your time its right value, your body its due respect, your mind its needed silence, you automatically leave less room for abuse. And the abuser, even the light social abuser, reacts with contempt. Not because you did something wrong, but because you took away a benefit. The fifth reason is almost ironic. Some people hate you because you're kind in a way they can't be. Mature kindness, the kind that doesn't flatter, doesn't beg, doesn't seduce, can feel like provocation to those who live off games. Because mature kindness doesn't ask for anything in return. It leaves no room for emotional debt. It doesn't enter the logic of, I did this for you, now you owe me. And that disarms those who only feel comfortable when there's unequal exchange. Plus, mature kindness exposes the other's roughness. When someone's used to being harsh, cynical, reactive, meeting someone who keeps elegance under pressure can produce shame. But not everyone tolerates shame, so they try to turn that shame into criticism. Oh, that's fake. Oh, that's posing. Oh, that's acting. It's a way to diminish what they can't reach. The sixth reason is direct. You're not easily labelable. The social world likes to simplify people, fit them into boxes. This one's the funny one, and this one's dramatic. This one's the sucker. This one's the poor thing. This one's the fixer. Labels make control easier. When you don't fit a label, you create uncertainty. And uncertainty for many is discomfort. You're polite but not submissive, kind but not naive, present but not available for abuse, calm but not passive. That confuses people who need fixed roles to feel safe. They don't know what strategy to use on you. They don't know if they guilt trip you, flatter you, threaten you, ignore you. And since they don't know, they fall back on the most primitive tool: reject. I'm not going to like this person becomes a way to protect themselves from their own discomfort. The seventh reason is one of the most common in everyday life. You don't react the way they expect. And when you don't react as expected, you break their emotional script. There are people who live to test. They provoke to see if you'll explode. They belittle to see if you'll beg. They disappear to see if you'll chase. And when you do none of that, they get irritated. Not because you did something, but because you didn't do what they wanted. This is key. In many dynamics, hate for no reason is actually frustration over lost control. The person wanted you to join the game, wanted the drama, wanted validation from your desperation, wanted to confirm they're still important, and you didn't give it. You held your ground, you stayed whole. So they accuse you, disqualify you, try to shrink you, because shrinking you is a way to ease their own sense of powerlessness. The eighth reason wraps this up with something few admit. You remind someone of an old wound. Sometimes you're not you in that person's mind. You're a symbol. You have a tone of voice, a way of speaking, a confidence, a presence that activates unconscious memories. It could be an absent father, a critical mother, an ex who left, a friend who betrayed, a sibling who was always better. And without realizing, they react to you as if you were that old character. They don't really know you. They use you as a screen. This is the most unfair rejection because you can't fix it. There's no argument, no proof, no showing who you are that solves it quickly. Because the problem isn't in your current behavior. It's in the other person's inner world. The most you can do is keep your dignity, not join the theater, not beg for a place where you're being attacked by a ghost. And now the most important part. Understanding these reasons isn't so you become suspicious of everyone. It's so you stop accusing yourself of everything. It's to gain discernment. There are rejections that are feedback and deserve reflection. But there are rejections that are projections and deserve distance. Stoicism helps you separate the two, because when you understand what depends on you, you improve without humiliating yourself. And when you understand what doesn't depend on you, you don't break trying to please. That changes how you walk in the world. You become more serene, more selective, more whole. When someone rejects you for no apparent reason, the pain doesn't just come from the act. It comes from the urge to turn it into a diagnosis about you. The mind wants to close the equation. If they treat me this way, there's something wrong with me. But most of the time, the real equation is different. If they treat me this way, something inside them got triggered. The relief starts when you get that. Freedom starts when you act from that. If the dislike comes from you not needing approval, from you not depending, from you not bending to have a place, the best response isn't to prove fake humility. It's to stay whole without turning into stone. Stoicism calls this autonomy. You don't turn the other's need into your obligation. You stay polite, but you don't explain yourself like you're asking permission to exist. You don't chase their discomfort. You don't try to tame their insecurity with too much kindness. Maturity here is simple. Whoever feels threatened by your independence is showing you their own attachment to control. Your job isn't to calm that attachment. It's not to get swallowed by it. When the root is comparison, and it usually is, the response isn't to dim your light to spare their ego. It's also not to compete. It's to not enter the arena. Comparison is a war no one wins. It just creates a climate where any quality becomes an offense. The Stoic observes that mechanism and refuses to participate. They don't need to justify being disciplined, being consistent, being calm, having clarity. If someone hates you because your presence exposes the excuses they tell themselves, that's pain that belongs to them. Jung would say, the shadow was touched. And when the shadow is touched, it tries to attack whoever illuminated it. Not out of conscious malice, but defense. Your way out is not to attack back, nor to lower yourself. It's to hold center and keep building life, because life built with principle is a mirror that doesn't apologize for reflecting. If what's behind it is a silent pact of mediocrity, that social agreement where no one improves, no one confronts, no one raises the bar because raising it would force everyone to look at themselves, the response is to choose virtue even if it leaves you a bit alone in some spaces. That kind of group rarely hates something specific you said. They hate the discomfort you cause just by existing with seriousness. Stoicism handles this with the virtue of courage, the courage not to mold yourself out of fear of disapproval. And with the virtue of justice, you don't humiliate, don't mock, don't put yourself above, you just refuse to betray your character to keep the fake harmony. True peace never comes from a collective lie. If the dislike comes from your boundaries, because boundaries offend those who wanted to invade, then the path isn't to harden or get aggressive. The path is quiet consistency. A boundary that turns into talk becomes debate. A boundary that turns into action becomes reality. There are those who try to punish you with coldness when they realize they lost access to your time, your availability, your energy. And here the Stoic question is this under my control? Their mood? No. Your stance? Yes. So you don't fight for the right to have boundaries, you simply live as someone who respects themselves. The natural consequence is that those used to benefiting from your excess call your measure selfishness. But temperance isn't selfishness. Temperance is health. If the root is in your mature kindness, that kindness that doesn't flatter, doesn't humiliate, doesn't beg, many people will try to disqualify it as fake. Because firm kindness exposes the contrast. It shows it's possible to be civilized without being submissive, and that dismantles the internal justifications of those who live reactively. The response here is not to abandon kindness because of those who can't receive it. It's to fine-tune kindness with discernment. You don't give the other the power to turn you bitter. Stoicism doesn't ask you to get hard, it asks you to be virtuous. And virtue includes goodness, but not naivety. You can be cordial without opening doors too wide. If the reason is that you're not easily labelable, you don't fit the box of manipulable, always available, always funny, always the fixer, the response is to accept that their confusion isn't your obligation. A lot of people need labels to control. When they can't, they feel insecure and translate insecurity as dislike. At this point, the inner work is not to fragment yourself to fit, not to become a simplified version of yourself to make the environment's reading easier. Stoicism calls this integrity. A person doesn't divide themselves to please. They adjust in behavior without betraying essence. If the rejection happens because you don't react as expected, you don't explode when provoked, don't beg when ignored, don't fight when poked, then you're facing a control test, even if disguised. The person wanted to pull you into an emotional script. Give me your anxiety, give me your justification, give me your loss of center. And you didn't give it. What to do? Keep not giving it. It sounds simple, but it takes discipline. Because sometimes the provocation is exactly to make you drop your stance. Serenity here isn't passivity, it's mastery. The Stoic understands that impulsive reaction is a form of slavery. They choose the freedom to respond, not the habit of reacting. And that changes everything. When you don't supply the fuel, the fire doesn't become a show. And when the dislike has no clear face because you're being treated as a symbol of an old wound, when you remind someone of someone, when your tone, your way, your posture activates unconscious memories, the response is not to try healing the other's trauma with your own life. That's a common trap for sensitive people, thinking that if they're patient enough, they'll fix what they didn't break. Jung would say, "You've become a projection screen." Stoicism would say, "This isn't under your control." So the stance is to keep emotional distance, reduce exposure, not take on the role they're offering. You can be respectful, but you don't need to stay near the gaze that confuses you with a ghost. Your mental health is worth more than an endless attempt to be understood. These responses have one thing in common. They return internal government to you. And that only happens when you stop negotiating with a very seductive fantasy. The fantasy that if you do everything right, no one will reject you. Life doesn't work that way. You can be whole and still be targeted by envy. You can be fair and still be misinterpreted. You can be kind and still be met with suspicion. The question isn't how to avoid being hated. The question is how to live well without being governed by others' hate. Here's the most useful practical summary. Evaluate honestly and without self-punishment if there's something of yours to adjust. If there is, adjust. If not, don't carry it. Guilt that isn't yours becomes a kind of leash. And the Stoic doesn't wear an emotional leash. Another equally important summary. Treat dislike for no reason as a filter. It doesn't define your worth, but it can reveal the kind of environment you're in. Insecure environments punish consistency. Healthy ones respect it. This doesn't mean you'll live searching for the perfect place. It means you'll stop insisting where the price to belong is shrinking yourself. The result of this process is quiet, You don't become someone who wins socially. You become someone who doesn't get lost. And in the end, that's the rarest victory. Staying human without being manipulable. Staying firm without getting bitter. Staying fair without begging for fairness. There's a peace that comes when you finally get it. Not every social discomfort is a problem to solve. Some are just signals. Signals that you've entered a place where emotional maturity is short, where comparison is routine, where insecurity rules more than honesty. And when you stop treating those signals as judgment on your worth, rejection loses its power to shrink you. The pain of being hated for no reason usually hurts in 3 layers. The first is surprise. You did nothing and still get treated like a threat. The second is confusion. You search for a flaw in yourself to explain the hostility. The third is the risk. You start adapting too much, pruning yourself, going quiet, reducing your presence to not bother. It's in that third layer that a lot of people get lost. Not because of others' malice, but because of a desperate attempt to avoid feeling excluded. And here's a point that changes everything. Some people don't hate you. They hate the feeling you awaken in them. Your silence can remind them of the inner noise they avoid. Your discipline can remind them of promises they broke to themselves. Your autonomy can remind them how much they depend on validation. Your boundaries can reveal how much they invade. Your firm kindness can expose the rudeness they've normalized. You're not the enemy, you're the mirror. And for an unprepared ego, a mirror is provocation. This doesn't mean you're perfect. It doesn't. It means you need to mature how you interpret others' looks. Because what wears you down isn't someone disliking you. What destroys from inside is you turning that into a sentence, into identity, into destiny. When you start believing you need approval for peace, you hand the steering wheel of your life to someone else's hands. Stoicism always pointed the same way. If you want stability, build it on what depends on you. The world is unstable, moods change, opinions swing, groups reorganize. Today you're good, tomorrow you're weird. Today you're useful, tomorrow you're disposable. Whoever lives on that scale lives restless. Whoever lives from their own conscience lives firm. And firmness isn't hardness. Firmness is clarity. It's knowing what's yours and what isn't. It's asking the right question in front of every rejection. Is there something true here I need to adjust? If there is, adjust serenely. No drama, no shame, no theater. But if not, don't carry it. Because carrying others' hostility like it's your guilt is a form of self-abandonment. And self-abandonment is usually the price we pay to keep the illusion of belonging. There's also a simple social truth almost no one admits. A lot of people only feel safe around people easy to control. People who need to be liked. People who apologize for breathing. People who explain themselves too much. People who mold to the environment. That creates comfort in the other ego. When you don't offer that kind of comfort, you become difficult. But difficult often just means not manipulable. And here's an important maturity. Not all friendliness is virtue, and not all dislike is a flaw. There are people who are friendly because they want something. And there are people who are unfriendly because they were touched in some inner place they don't want to recognize. If you get that, you stop getting disorganized easily. You start treating relationships as they deserve, with discernment. Discernment isn't paranoia. Discernment is not handing your heart to any reaction the world has. Maybe you've spent life trying to be pleasant. Not in the sense of being kind, but in the sense of reducing friction, avoiding conflict, not disappointing anyone. And that becomes a silent prison. Your identity gets built around others' relief. You learn to read the room, anticipate reactions, soften truths, adapt to not be a target. But at some point life collects. Because you can avoid dislike for a while, but you pay with something else. Your authenticity, your peace, your spontaneity. Then comes an adult question. Is it worth being accepted if the price is erasing yourself? Is it worth being liked if you have to shrink to keep it? Is it worth belonging if you have to betray your own nature to fit? This kind of question doesn't have a quick answer, but it has a direction. And the direction is usually this. Better to be respected by a few than tolerated by many at the cost of your own dignity. Unjustified rejection also has another useful effect if you know how to look. It reveals where emotional fragility exists. An environment that hates for no reason is usually one of silent competition, fear, comparison, games. And maybe the hidden gift is this. You spot earlier where not to invest your life. You learn not to insist, learn not to explain, learn not to bargain for space, learn to leave inside before leaving outside. And that's a kind of freedom. There's an elegance in this. You don't need to prove you're good. You just need to be good. You don't need to convince everyone. You just need to live consistently. You don't need to win the court of others' opinions. You just need to be at peace with the court of your own conscience. And when you live like that, something curious happens. You become less vulnerable to hate for no reason because you stop offering what that hate wants from you. Reaction, anxiety, self-accusation, desperation for belonging. Gratuitous hate often feeds on your energy trying to fix what you didn't break. When you stop, it wilts. It may keep existing, but it loses power over you. So if there's a real closing to this topic, it's this. Not everyone is going to like you. And that's not a tragedy. It's a human fact. The tragedy would be spending life trying to be loved by everyone and in the process, failing to be true to yourself. Maturity isn't being immune to rejection. It's not being governed by it. If this helped you see rejections with more clarity and less guilt, write in the comments, I don't carry what isn't mine. If you know someone who lives blaming themselves for looks, hints, and unexplained dislike, share this video. And if you want to follow more content like this on Stoicism and practical psychology for real life, like and subscribe to the channel.